but the Democrats are fighting for their own political survival. We witnessed here on this very floor earlier today the majority of Democrats vote no on paying these essential workers in the federal government. Air traffic controllers, our military men and women, the Capitol policemen that protect this complex, the staff that we see here sitting today. They voted no. One Democrat senator candidly confided to the Hill newspaper that if Democrats vote to reopen the government, quote, people are going to get hammered by their liberal base. Another admits there are enough Democrats who would vote to reopen the government, quote, if people were not terrified of getting the guillotine. Apparently, the socialist uprising within the Democrat Party is turning into a modern-day French Revolution, folks, and playing the role of Marie Antoinette, proclaiming, "Let them eat cake," is Senator Schumer. The truth is Democrats are literally, I mean literally, taking food out of the mouths of babes to save themselves from their own unhinged voters. Instead of bending to the loudmouth liberal lunatics and socialist sociopaths who make up their base, Democrats should listen to their colleague, Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania. Senator Fetterman called the shutdown, quote, bad political theater, adding, quote, there are no winners here. It's not getting better every day here. People are going to start to get really hungry, end quote. He's absolutely right, folks. And the Democrats know it's causing pain. In fact, that's the whole point of this exercise. Congresswoman Catherine Clark, the second in line in the House Democratic leadership, said the quiet part out loud, stating, quote, families are going to suffer because of the shutdown. She calls that suffering, quote, leverage. Leverage. The American people and their suffering babies are leverage. Using the suffering of the very people we were elected to serve as political leverage is just plain sick. Mr. President, perhaps Republicans need to start using our own leverage, the Senate schedule. If Chuck Schumer cancels Thanksgiving for millions of families across America who can't feed their children, the holiday should be canceled for the Senate as well. We should all be prepared to stay here until we reopen the government, so no child will go to bed hungry because of Schumer's shutdown shenanigans. This is a serious job, folks. We need to take it seriously, we need to act seriously, and we need to ensure the shutdown ends. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Iowa.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 4 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Environment and Public Works be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 2316.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 2316, an act to amend the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act to provide that interest on obligations held in the Federal Aid to Wildlife Restoration Fund shall become available for apportionment at the beginning of fiscal year 2033.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 110, S259.
Clerk will report.
Calendar number 110, S259, a bill to direct the Federal Communications Commission to publish a list of entities that hold authorizations, licenses, or other grants of authority issued by the Commission and that have certain foreign ownership and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
Is there further debate? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 35, S99.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 35, S99, a bill to require the Secretary of Commerce to produce a report that provides recommendations to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and impact of Department of Commerce programs related to supply chain resilience and manufacturing and industrial innovation, and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following resolutions, which are at the desk. S Resolution 464, S Resolution 465.
Is there an objection to proceeding en bloc? Without objection, the Senate will proceed en bloc.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 3 p.m. on Monday, October 27th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., the Senate execute the orders with respect to the Talbelson and Lewis nominations.
Without objection, so ordered.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senators Welch and Whitehouse.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, every single one of us, every member of the United States Senate, my fellow Vermonters, all Americans, people around the world are absolutely thrilled by the ceasefire in Gaza. After 2 years of relentless bombing, after 2 years of horror for the hostages and their families, the bombing has largely stopped and the hostages are home. This is extraordinary. And I salute everyone involved in getting us to this day, including President Trump. But let's be clear, there is more work to be done. The only way this ceasefire will succeed is if it is the beginning of a relentless, tireless process that aims to get us to the two-state solution. 2 states for 2 peoples. A safe and democratic Jewish state of Israel, alongside a sovereign state for the Palestinians that are indigenous to the land where they now live, as envisioned in the president's 20-point plan and has been U.S. policy for over 50 years. So the question before us is, will all who are involved, particularly the United States government, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Palestinian Authority, U.S. partners in the Gulf and our European allies, will everyone do every single thing possible to make that success of a lasting peace through a 2-state solution a likelihood? And let me be candid, Mr. President. I am extremely alarmed at what we're already seeing since the ceasefire. On the Israeli side, Mr. Netanyahu is continuing to dial up or down the delivery of urgently needed food or medicine, depending on what his political desires of the moment are. And after 2 years of already having kept food out, largely, for starving kids, that has to be provided with the 600 trucks a day, unabated, continuously and regularly. And at the same time, Hamas is score settling, is committing public executions and intimidating the Palestinians who yearn for peace and a return to some degree of normalcy. The impediments to peace are deep and they are clear. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to make sure that the violence and the destruction does not resume? In Gaza, one thing is absolutely essential. Mr. Netanyahu must stop blocking the medicine in the food for starving kids and Palestinians. We cannot condone the Israeli military under the instructions of the Netanyahu government from illegally blocking international food aid from getting through Rafah. And yet we see a continuation of children facing severe malnutrition and hunger. We also see kids who are sick and had the promise of getting health care, cancer treatment, women who need maternity facilities or basic medicines and treatments still not having access to them. The Netanyahu government cannot be allowed to once again turn on and off the supply of food and medicine and use it as a military tool. Withholding fruit and vegetables and other food from 1 million hungry kids is not a military response. It's a collective punishment. Next, Mr. Netanyahu must finally, once and for all, stop the bombing in Gaza. The IDF's own data shows that more than 5 out of 6 people killed by IDF bombs supplied by the U.S. over the past 2 years were civilian casualties. And those government bombings that have been renewed in Gaza this week, killing nearly 100 and injuring even more after 2 soldiers were killed in Rafah, has got to stop. These types of response bombings that were so frequent before the ceasefire, disproportionate and illegal by and large, are no more legal and as disproportionate when they're occurring after the ceasefire and jeopardize the stability and survivability of the ceasefire. So we should be calling on the Netanyahu government to reopen the medical evacuation corridor so that those Palestinian kids in Gaza with traumatic war wounds, bullets in their bodies and missing limbs can be evacuated to Palestinian church hospitals in Jerusalem. And the violence and settler attacks in the West Bank also represent an ominous threat to the ceasefire and a threat to fulfilling a true vision of peace. Gaza and the West Bank are part of what will be a separate Palestinian state. And that violence that it's occurring at the hands of settlers has to be stopped by the Netanyahu government. And Mr. President, just this week in the West Bank, we saw violent attacks by masked, club-wielding settlers on Palestinian villages and harvesters. They even attacked the very same village that our ambassador, Mike Huckabee, had visited and promised to protect only a few months before. This photograph, taken only a few days ago, is the result of an illegal Israeli settler beating a 55-year-old woman who is harvesting olives on her family's ancestral lands, beating her with that club without mercy, without restraint. Her name is Ufa Abu Aliua. She's a mother and she's a victim of violence. And this just happened days ago. By the way, October marks the start of the olive harvest season across the West Bank. And since the start of the harvest, where folks have to go from their homes to the fields, illegal Israeli settlers have reportedly staged 158 assaults against Palestinian farmers, and they've destroyed nearly 800 trees. And these trees, as you know, are nurtured over generations, just like the ones on the Mount of Olives. And many Palestinian families depend on them as their only source of income. The violence, by the way, also impacts Americans. And if Mr. Netanyahu is serious about working with the president and supporting the ceasefire that he did agree to, he'll take action to hold accountable those responsible for the Americans killed by Israeli forces and illegal settlers. Americans like Saif Musalat, a Florida teenager who was on vacation visiting family when he was attacked and he was killed by illegal settlers. And Mr. Netanyahu must also finally help the United States investigate the killing of the American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot by an Israeli sniper from a couple of hundred yards away, nowhere near any Israeli troops. The Palestinian state envisioned by the ceasefire requires that Mr. Netanyahu also end the constant expansion of settlements into the West Bank. The Israeli government must stop demolishing Palestinian homes, sometimes using bulldozers paid for by American taxpayers. And yet, the Netanyahu government is going full steam ahead. This is an immense impediment to peace. And to be certain, Hamas, too, must lay down its arms. It must refrain from violence. That is an incredible threat to the ceasefire. Ultimately, Hamas has got to go. Hamas violence is that threat to peace. It's a threat to the Palestinians living in Gaza who yearn for peace and yearn for an opportunity to rebuild where they live and have their kids be back in school and to be safe. The ceasefire acknowledges that there must be a force that has sufficient authority to quell Hamas violence. This is the peacekeeping force that was in the 20-point presidential plan. If we're going to be successful, we have to redouble our efforts to stand that force up and make certain that all the signatories to that peace plan do their part to make certain that that can happen. President Trump's leadership to help achieve a ceasefire, that leadership must be redoubled to achieve a durable peace and a lasting peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians. To have this stop on the day the agreement was signed without then redoubling efforts to face the difficult challenges that await resolution after the ceasefire will result in failure. So I call on the President, I urge all of us to do every single thing we can to stay focused on the implementation of the peace plan and not turn away as though this is yesterday's problem. Because if we don't do that, it will be tomorrow's problem once again. Mr. President, I urge all of us to accept the burden of leadership that is absolutely required for the well-being of the entire region, but for the promise of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and for the promise of the Palestinian people living alongside in peace with Israeli neighbors. Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Connecticut, Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I rise here for the 302nd time to urge this somnolent, compromised body to wake up to the dangers of climate change, again with my trusty and increasingly battered chart. This time, my focus is on the fossil fuel industry's corrupting influence over the Trump administration and what that means for Americans. When I stood before you for the 296th time back in January, I predicted that the fossil fuel looters and polluters would take over the federal government. I am saddened but not surprised that my grim forecast has already come true. It's only October, and already it's clear that the fossil fuel industry bought, paid for, and now straight up owns the Trump administration. And it's only going to get worse. For years, I warned that if we let fossil fuel money pour into our politics unchecked, if we let dark money run rampant, and if we let polluters sabotage science, then one day the government would cease to belong to we the people, and instead belong to them, the polluters. Well, that day has arrived. Last month, I set out the fossil fuel industry's 4 phases of climate denial. Phase 1, bury the evidence, refuse to disclose what they knew, what their own scientists were telling them. Phase 2, actively mislead the public when the evidence they had buried ultimately comes out. Phase 3, flood the political zone with dark money to buttress the climate denial fraud using unlimited funding unleashed by Citizens United. Now we're in phase 4, where an increasingly desperate fossil fuel operation switches from defense and blockade to attack. Today, I'll do a deep dive on Phase 4, the corruption and weaponization of government phase, and how it is playing out across the corrupt Trump administration. Phase 4 is different. They're not just hiding or misleading or politically obstructing any longer. In Phase 4, the fossil fuel industry fully corrupts the entire executive branch and uses the power of government to go after and crush its clean energy competition. Behind this plot are the creepy billionaires who run the industry, out to get even richer at the expense of the American people. Let me be blunt. The Trump administration does not work for you, the American people. It works for fossil fuel billionaires and their sprawling dark money corruption machine, which, no coincidence, helped put Trump in office for a second time. Don't take my word about whom they work for. An official from the White House's own new so-called National Energy Dominance Council offered, and I quote here, concierge white glove service to help keep polluting coal plants open and mines in operation. That official, by the way, previously worked for Shell Oil and Valero Energy. Every agency, every decision, every policy of this corrupt administration is in the service of its fossil fuel donors and patrons. Fossil fuels looters and polluters are running the United States government for their own benefit from the inside. President Trump, EPA Administrator Zeldin, Energy Secretary Wright, Interior Secretary Burgum, the whole lot of them is bought and paid for. So settle in, and I'll walk you through it, from the offer and acceptance to the return on fossil fuels political investment to the costs to the American people. Let's start with the moment of sale. It was April 2024. Early April. Candidate Trump was desperate. His criminal trial would begin in 4 days, and his best shot at staying out of jail was winning the presidency. But the unpopular politicians, unpopular policies just weren't moving the needle. There was one thing left to do. It was time to make a deal. Cornered and starved for cash, Trump invited the fossil fuel donor elite to Mar-a-Lago. Sensing an opportunity, into those faux guilt halls strolled the oil barons, the gas tycoons, the petrochemical magnates, the pipeline moguls. If you'd struck oil or gas in America, you likely received an invitation. And by the way, they were a little desperate themselves because their business model was failing against the relentless pressure of cheaper, cleaner, more popular renewable energy. There, at his club, candidate Trump delivered his offer. It was not subtle. No think tank jargon or super PAC euphemisms, no speaking in code. He looked out at those assembled fossil fuel billionaires and made a simple pitch. Give me $1 billion and I will do anything and everything you want. The fossil fuel billionaires were only too happy to take that deal. Harold Hamm, the fracking kingpin, opened his checkbook. Jeffrey Hildebrand, the Texas oil man, poured in millions. Kelsey Warren, a pipeline magnate, joined. Other familiar players like George Bishop, Tim Dunn, the Wilkes brothers, they all lined up. The fossil fuel donor elite understood the corrupt bargain. Invest just $1 billion, and maybe not all of that $1 billion. They're at hundreds of millions, we're not sure. But let's say it was $1 billion that ended up coming through. $1 billion to preserve the annual $700+ billion subsidy that fossil fuels free-to-pollute business model relies on. $1 billion once for $700 billion a year. And on top of that, they could reap untold added billions in new tax subsidies, pollution deregulation, protection from legal accountability for misdeeds, and even a government-backed war they could run against their feared clean energy competition. This was not just a fundraiser. This was no boisterous campaign rally. This was a deal, a billion-dollar quid pro quo deal. This corrupt deal marked a turning point in American history. Before, fossil fuels influenced, using political dark money and dark money threats and promises. They lied, using a decades-long campaign of denial, deception, and doublespeak to hide the harmful effects of their products. Those two operations, the climate denial fraud operation and the dark money corruption operation, together had blocked any meaningful bipartisan climate legislation. They killed that dead the instant Citizens United gave them that power. The 2024 elections gave the fossil fuel barons full control. Under the Trump regime, the United States government has acted exactly as you would expect a corrupted government to act. Every agency captured, climate and energy laws and regulations rewritten, all the inconvenient science ignored, silenced, or worse, erased completely. Say goodbye to government for we the people, and hello to government for them, the polluters. The entire Trump administration works for its fossil fuel donors. On January 2025, day one in office, President Trump issued industry-drafted executive orders designed to kneecap fossil fuels clean energy competition and prop up fossil fuel. One executive order even wrote wind energy and solar energy out of the definition of energy. These executive orders are now implemented by federal agencies that are in the hands of stooges of the big polluters. Let's start with the Environmental Protection Agency. There's so much rot over there, it's hard to know where to begin. So I'll start with personnel. Atop the agency is Lee Zeldin. You may know him as the erstwhile congressman from New York or the failed gubernatorial candidate. But did you know of his role as the errand boy for billionaire Trump donor and oil executive Tim Dunn? Until January, Zeldin had a cushy role at the America First Policy Institute, a pro-Trump so-called think tank founded by oil man Dunn. AFPI is hell-bent on increasing fossil fuel production, reducing fossil fuel regulation, and protecting the free-to-pollute fossil fuel business model. Dunn was thrilled to have his boy Zeldin slides slammily into EPA. Then there's EPA Deputy Administrator David Fatui and head of the Office of Air and Radiation, Aaron Szabo, who before joining the EPA spent years defending polluting industries in court or making polluters' pitches to us in Congress. Stephen Cook, Principal Deputy Assistant in the EPA's Office of Land and Emergency Management, recently represented the American fuel and petroleum manufacturers in its legal challenge to an EPA cleanup rule. Now he is the regulator he just fought in court. Nancy Beck, the Trump's EPA chemical safety advisor, used to help run the chemical manufacturers' main trade association, the American Chemistry Council. And Sean Donahue, well, he is the EPA's top lawyer, even though he has never taken a deposition, tried a case to verdict, argued a motion, or authored and signed a legal pleading. But his partner was Deputy Director of Personnel at the White House, and fossil fuel deregulation depends on usefully incompetent lawyers. The foxes are literally guarding the EPA henhouse. Once the pride of American environmental stewardship, the EPA is now turned inside out. Instead of writing rules to protect the public from pollution, it's writing rules to protect polluters from public accountability. EPA's most striking betrayal to date was its move to repeal the endangerment finding, the scientific and legal cornerstone that acknowledged greenhouse gases are a threat to public health and welfare. Without that finding, EPA would have no authority or obligation to regulate climate pollution, which is precisely the whole point. This is not about science. This is not about law. This is about doing the bidding of the polluting fossil fuel industry, which doesn't want to be regulated and which must pollute for free to survive. Never mind the enormous cost and harm that dumps onto American families. To justify its proposed repeal of the endangerment finding, EPA leaned on a junk Department of Energy so-called climate report, a cooked-up document so baseless that more than 85 real climate scientists issued a comprehensive rebuttal of it as fundamentally flawed, biased, full of errors, and not fit to inform policymaking. A quote there. The American Meteorological Society condemned it as misleading and dangerous. Of course, the so-called climate report was not science. It was propaganda, fossil fuel propaganda. With 99% consensus in peer-reviewed scientific literature that fossil fuel emissions are dangerously changing our climate, you would be hard-pressed to find 5 climate scientists who would downplay or deny climate change. Trump's corrupt Department of Energy found all 5. They weren't hard to find, though, because they all worked for fossil fuel front groups. They were chosen precisely because they would deny established science. Get a load of this crew. Dr. Roy Spencer, previously a visiting fellow at the climate denialist Heritage Foundation, funded, no surprise, by ExxonMobil, Donors Trust, the Koch Foundations, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation, all fossil fuel companies or dark money outfits pushing fossil fuels pollute for free agenda. Dr. John Christie, linked to conservative front group Competitive Enterprise Institute, funded with dark money from the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers, the Charles Koch Institute, Donors Trust, the Heritage Foundation, Marathon Petroleum, and Murray Energy. Dr. Judith Curry, who charges $400 per hour for consulting services to petroleum companies, electric utilities, and natural gas energy traders. A frequent face also here in Congress, spewing fossil fuel-funded propaganda in committee hearings. Dr. Stephen Coonan, formerly at British Petroleum, now a fellow at the Hoover Institute, a conservative-leaning research organization funded by ExxonMobil, Donors Trust, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation. Finally, Dr. Ross McKittrick of the Cato Institute, funded by Charles Koch, Donors Trust, ExxonMobil, Murray Energy, and the Scaife Family Foundations. And he's also a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, funded by the Charles G. Koch Foundation, ExxonMobil, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation. If you're sensing a pattern, you should be. Everyone knew the report was nonsense, but it gave the polluters a fig leaf behind which EPA could try to deregulate fossil fuel pollution. No surprise, the group of climate deniers was disbanded before they had to answer to the public under the Administrative Procedures Act for their junk report. Trump's corrupt EPA is also repealing methane standards, undoing auto emissions rules, abandoning air pollution safeguards, scrapping limits on toxic emissions, cutting protections against pollution from coal plants like mercury and carbon dioxide, even clawing back billions in appropriated funding for clean energy. Hell, EPA literally provided polluters with a special email address to get exemptions from air toxics rules. Concierge service indeed. Trump's EPA had to really bend the rules to roll back state safeguards, like California's Clean Air Act waiver, created a half-century ago in recognition of California's then immense air pollution challenges and its early leadership in improving air quality. Waivers allow California and other states like Rhode Island that follow California's lead to set tougher pollution standards for cars and trucks sold inside their borders. But tougher pollution standards mean selling less gasoline, and so they went at the California waiver. There was a trick here. Trump's EPA submitted California's waivers to Congress as so-called final rules, which they weren't and which had never been done before. But it made them vulnerable to undoing by simple Senate majority here under the Congressional Review Act, a trick, by the way, suggested by fossil fuel industry lawyers in the polluter page of the Wall Street Journal. Well, GAO and the Senate parliamentarian rejected the effort to falsely label the waivers as rules. So our fossil fuel-funded Republican friends went nuclear, overruled the Senate parliamentarian, and killed the state waivers. A sour joke from a party that in other circumstances claims to be all about states' rights, states' ability to self-govern, and cooperative federalism. Thanks to the corrupt billion-dollar deal, the Environmental Protection Agency is now clearly the polluter protection agency, bought and paid for. Goodbye again to we the people. Hello to them, the polluters. Let's talk about the Trump Justice Department, perhaps better called Oil, Gas, and Coal LLP. You can't understand the corruption at EPA without understanding how Trump weaponized the Justice Department to become the fossil fuel industry's taxpayer-funded law firm. One example. From the get-go, EPA Administrator Zeldin was hell-bent on clawing back more than $20 billion in clean energy grants Congress had appropriated. But he had a problem. There was no legal basis to do so. Enter Trump's corrupted DOJ, which tried to cook up a fake criminal investigation to provide a pretext to freeze the funds. Zeldin echoed the theme with multiple phony and likely defamatory allegations of criminal and fraudulent behavior by grant recipients, who, by the way, included among them nefarious organizations like Habitat for Humanity. Well, next problem. The evidence was so weak that the chief of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office Criminal Division resigned rather than authorize the fake criminal investigation. And no other career attorney in the whole office would sign on. So, Trump's since fired interim U.S. attorney personally submitted a warrant application with no career cosigner. And guess what? He got shot down by the magistrate judge for lack of probable cause. Any federal prosecutor can tell you how unusual and how embarrassing that is. Desperate, Trump's DOJ tried to shop the same failed investigation to other U.S. attorneys' offices, hoping somebody, anybody, would pursue the failed warrant. And in case that weren't enough, meanwhile, in another courtroom, back in the same D.C. courthouse, Department of Justice lawyers in a civil matter were denying that they alleged fraud in the use of those funds. What a mess. Seeking warrants without proof, prompting career officials to resign, making fake public assertions of criminality, failing in court, making inconsistent legal arguments in the same courthouse, all of that to claw back money duly appropriated by Congress and properly obligated to grantees, all to help grow the clean energy sector and reduce air pollution? None of that is normal DOJ. This is weaponized DOJ. Just last month, DOJ's fossil fuels law firm went to federal court in New York to strike down a state law requiring the largest fossil fuel polluters to pay into a fund to redress New York's climate damages for infrastructure, adaptation, for disaster recovery. DOJ, the United States Department of Justice, went to court to argue the polluter's case, that the law was an unconstitutional overreach that federal courts should rein in. The Justice Department of the United States, paid for by U.S. taxpayers, used its resources to give a taxpayer freebie to the likes of ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Shell, and Koch Industries, companies with plentiful armies of lawyers of their own. Trump's corrupted DOJ also sued Vermont to strike down a similar state law, and even sued Hawaii and Michigan to stop those states from suing fossil fuel companies before the state's complaints had even hit the docket. This is not normal DOJ. This is weaponized DOJ. Why is DOJ acting so strangely? As a former prosecutor, I'm telling you, this makes no sense unless you follow the money. After the billion-dollar quid pro quo deal, DOJ has become the polluter's taxpayer-funded law firm. Goodbye to we the people as the DOJ client. Hello to the new client, them the polluters. Third is Trump's Department of Energy. It's run by Chris Wright, the former CEO of an oil and gas services company, handpicked to lead DOE by, guess who? Oil billionaire Harold Hamm, who organized the Mar-a-Lago billion-dollar deal donor dinner. DOE should be advancing clean energy, supporting energy innovation, and funding the energy technologies of tomorrow, as Congress has authorized it to do. Instead, this Department of Energy has become a fossil fuel industry lackey. You've got to recognize, in looking at what is going on over there, that Trump's executive orders, supposedly to unleash American energy, are written in code. It's not a complicated code. In the code, the word energy is code for fossil fuel. Understand that, and the rest becomes obvious. And look at the behavior. Department of Energy cut clean energy grants for low-carbon technologies and for reducing emissions. Department of Energy slashed funding for solar energy by 87% and wind energy by 78%. Department of Energy created a $625 million bailout fund for expensive, polluting coal-fired power plants. During the current shutdown, Trumpsters are piling on for fossil fuel polluters, so far scrapping $7.56 billion in clean energy grants. All of them, I'm sure, by coincidence, in 16 states where Kamala Harris won the presidential election. All of this will raise costs for people. DOE knows how grids work. They know that suppressing clean energy means that the grid has to call up expensive, polluting fossil fuel plants, plants that might otherwise be idle because they're too expensive to run. They know that this moves billions from utility customers' pockets to the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. This is not a glitch. This is the goal. Oh, and don't forget that it was DOE that cooked up the junk science report and teed up EPA to ditch its duty to regulate fossil fuel emissions. Thanks to the billion-dollar deal, Trump's corrupted Department of Energy is, by its own coded definition, not the Department of Energy, it's the Department of Fossil Fuel. Again, goodbye to we the people, hello to them the polluters. Next is the Department of Interior, once a steward of America's public land and waters. The billion-dollar deal turned it into a leasing agent for fossil fuel. Trump's Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, another cabinet member selected by Big Oil's Harold Hamm, is busy as he tries to crush offshore wind, expanding offshore drilling, opening vast stretches of the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska's Cook Inlet to his oil and gas industry clientele. Onshore, he's handing out leases across the West. Never mind the effects these projects will have on the climate, on water resources, or on nearby communities. Trump's Interior is even lowering royalty fees and environmental standards to make sure drillers get maximum profit at minimum responsibility. lowering royalty fees, which are already lower than what most private landowners charge, obviously takes money directly from taxpayers and hands it to oil and gas barons, looting and polluting. At the same time, Trump's out to assassinate clean, reliable wind energy. In New York, Interior halted work on a fully permitted, under construction, 810-megawatt offshore wind farm on justification so dubious they're almost entirely redacted out of FOIA'd documents. Off Rhode Island and Connecticut, someone at Moscow Central told Interior to slap a stop work order on Revolution Wind when it was nearly finished. Get this. Government lawyers had to go into court and make arguments exactly opposite to arguments they had made defending the same project in the same courthouse just weeks before. No surprise, the fake stop work order cratered in court, but those corrupt shenanigans cost the project at least $60 million. Here, it's not just blue states. Out west in Idaho, Interior reversed approval of Lava Ridge, a 1,000-megawatt wind project that suddenly had legal deficiencies. Why would the federal government sabotage clean energy projects on their way to completion? Follow the money. It goes to fossil fuel donors. Every electron from clean energy that gets delayed is an electron that gas and coal barons get to burn fossil fuel to sell. And since wind and solar energy are actually cheaper, your utility bills go up. It's a direct transfer of cash from American families to fossil fuel companies and their billionaire owners. Interior has even started to auction off wildlife refuges, treasured places that should be sanctuaries for threatened species. Oil and gas companies are now invited to bid on land set aside for conservation. National parks face budget cuts, lost protections, and industrial projects right at their borders. Trump's corrupt interior is no longer about preserving these landscapes for future generations, but about what can be extracted from them now by big donors. The public loses cherished lands and protections that took decades to establish, all for a short-term fossil fuel payday. Interior ignores tribal consultation, pressing forward with drilling projects on ancestral lands without meaningful dialogue or consent. Tribal governments and Native communities, just obstacles to be brushed aside rather than sovereign partners with legal rights. This behavior echoes a long, shameful history of disregard for indigenous voices when fossil fuel profits are at stake. This is no all-of-the-above energy strategy, as the administration claims. It is a fossil fuel-first strategy that kneecaps clean power while supercharging oil and gas. The Interior Department is now basically the auctioneer for oil and gas leases. Public lands are no longer treasures for the people, they are commodities for the polluters. So again, goodbye government for we the people, hello government for them, the polluters. Last, we have the State Department. Under visionary leaders like John Kerry, the State Department once led America's global engagement on climate, helping secure the landmark Paris Agreement and accomplishing impressive and enormous international oceans protections from the climate threat. Now, with Trump calling the shots and Marco Rubio dutifully implementing his whims, the U.S. has exited the Paris Agreement and impedes cooperation on climate action. Just last week, using unprecedented tactics, the Trump administration bullied the International Maritime Organization into delaying a carbon-based levy for shipping emissions. Just so you can put this in context, shipping is responsible for more global carbon pollution than all but 5 countries, and it's completely unregulated. Shipping emissions degrade air quality around ports like Los Angeles, meaning millions of people breathe dirty air. There are clean alternatives to maritime fossil fuels. The technologies are ready. And the shipping industry wanted to make this transition. Plus, there's almost no cost to consumers. There's almost no American ship involved. But the Trump administration wouldn't have it, because every ship that runs on green ammonia or some other pollution-free fuel means one fewer ship that runs on bunker oil or LNG. And that means less money into the pockets of Trump's fossil fuel donors. Plus, it was a threat. It was a threat to the free-to-pollute business model that fossil fuel wrongfully depends on. So, we'll find out more about this, but with truly unprecedented tactics, the corrupt Trumpsters went full Al Capone, or maybe it should be called Oil Capone, to crush it. I should add that when I said last we had the State Department, that wasn't completely accurate, because Trump has put the whole of government in the service of his fossil fuel donors, not just the cabinet agencies. I'll just give one example: the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps has a long and proud history, with a primary role to build and maintain flood control and safety infrastructure, levees, seawalls, and the like. The Army Corps also has a role in permitting energy projects. And last month, it announced that it would prioritize projects that are energy dense. Energy dense. In other words, those that generate a large amount of power on a relatively small footprint of land. Energy dense is a made-up thing. It is a fake concept, reverse engineered from the result that they want to achieve through it, to favor supposedly energy-dense fossil fuel projects over wind and solar farms that are more spread out. Except it's fake. Energy density, if it were real, would count the spread of pollution from fossil fuel plants, like soot particulates that can travel hundreds of miles, or greenhouse gases causing global harm. If it were real, it would count the huge supply footprint these fossil fuel plants require to run, the mining and drilling for coal and oil and gas, and all the related environmental destruction, the trucks, railroads, and pipelines spewing and leaking that deliver the fuels. In real life, the wind and sunshine that power renewable power plants have no footprint at all. The real-life footprint of fossil plants, it's far larger than renewable plants. Yet, in fake, corrupted Trump world, fossil fuel plants will get their permits expedited while the corrupt Trump administration stalls renewable facilities over made-up energy density. Seriously, does energy density sound like a policy based in reason or is it based on campaign cash? So that's a quick tour of the fossil fuel industry's deep corruption of the Trump administration, of its oily tentacles sliding slimily into federal agencies that should be working for the American people. But this is also a story about who picks up the bill, who pays when government is corrupted. Spoiler alert, it's you, the regular, hardworking American public. Bad enough that the billion-dollar deal allowed our government to be bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. Add on that every favor and freebie given to the fossil fuel industry costs the American people. Let's start with disaster costs. Extreme natural disasters cost Americans between $99 and $126 billion in the first half of this year alone. NOAA's database of billion-dollar disasters shows the line going up and up and up. Storm after storm, flood after flood, fire after fire. So, the Trump administration wants to end that database, as if silencing the burglar alarm will make the burglary end. Each disaster means billions in federal aid, billions in rebuilding costs, billions in uncompensated harm to Americans, billions that taxpayers and homeowners have to pay or suffer because polluters pollute for free. Increasing disaster costs bring something along with them: increasing homeowners' insurance problems. Problems both in affordability and availability. Premiums are soaring far faster than the rate of inflation. In Florida, the average premium is $14,000 per year and climbing. In Louisiana, already $11,000 per year. Insurance companies are leaving or abandoning customers, with non-renewals to homeowners doubling or worse in many states over the last 6 years. If Americans can't get homeowners insurance, then their property can't get a mortgage. And that spells trouble for property values in climate-exposed communities across the country. About 6 months ago, the Fed chair, Jay Powell, testified in the Senate that within 10 to 15 years, there would be whole regions of the United States where mortgages were no longer available. That's not coming from a green group, that's coming from the Fed. And it hits home. Families dropped from coverage are left in uninsurable homes that they might have worked a lifetime to buy, whose value plummets when mortgages can't be had. This is all fine fun and games if you're a Palm Beach billionaire selling your mansion all cash to another billionaire. But in real life, it's devastating for hardworking people, say a tradesperson living near Orlando, trying to sell their family's biggest single investment. They bought that home with a mortgage. They need to sell it to someone who can get a mortgage if they're going to get their price. With no mortgage, the price crashes. This is a cascade. It starts with fossil fuel emissions, which amp up climate risk, creating an insurance crisis, making properties unmortgageable, crashing homeowners' property values, and cascading into full-on economic recession. The warnings of this abound. And if fossil fuel weren't so powerful in this building, they'd be listened to. Your premiums go up, or your coverage disappears, and your home value plummets. And what does the Trump administration have to say about this? Well, they're not listening to you. They're lying to you because they're so deep in the pockets of the polluters who caused it all. Energy bills. Energy bills are getting out of hand. Several things drive this. First, we subsidize fossil fuel, locking in fossil dependence, so consumers get roasted whenever the international oil cartel jacks up global commodity prices, which we see them do all the time. Second, U.S. consumers pay more when the fossil fuel industry decides to export oil and gas for higher prices overseas. And there's less domestic supply because it got exported, and when there's less domestic supply, that predictably raises prices. The Trump administration forcing utilities to run aging and expensive coal and gas plants that were slated for retirement will likely add $3 billion per year to your electricity bills. $3 billion. But your added cost is fossil fuels' added revenue. You're the one getting cheated. The biggest hit will come from Trump sabotaging clean energy technologies. Technologies that already produce electricity at lower cost. Here's how it works. When less expensive clean energy can't get on the grid, expensive polluting fossil fuel plants that would otherwise be idle as too expensive to run get called up instead. Those more expensive plants then set the price for the grid, and your costs go up. The trick is that the fossil interests that own and fuel those cost-setting plants get an enormous payday. With clean energy on the grid, their revenue can drop to zero because that plant is too expensive to run. But you back out the cheaper clean energy, or you don't let new clean energy on the grid, and suddenly that plant roars back to polluting life. And the money flows to the plant owner, and the money flows to the fossil fuel dealers that bring the fuel to the plant. It is a direct transfer from ratepayers' pockets to fossil fuel barons. And they're hoping you won't figure that out, that you'll blame it on the electric utility and not notice how the grid is being gamed by fossil fuel. Working families and small businesses are getting stuck paying the bill for a system that has been rigged by the Trump administration for big oil's benefit. Climate brings health dangers, and those health dangers are real. Fossil fuel production and combustion release toxins, benzene, hydrogen sulfide, particulate matter, to name just a few. And they have an effect. Children near fossil fueled power plants and oil and gas wells suffer higher rates of asthma. Nearby communities experience higher rates of cancer, heart disease, and neurological damage. Air pollution just from fossil fuel production and combustion costs the average American about $2,500 in extra health care expense. And even if you don't suffer from heart or respiratory disease, you still pay more as insurance companies, health insurance companies, spread around across their customer base those added costs. Nationwide, that added cost is around $820 billion annually. That's a cost of fossil fuel. It's a cost of fossil fuel that fossil fuel doesn't pay, even though economics says externalities like this should be in the cost, in the price of the product. But that's the pollute for free business model. The industry externalizes their pollution costs, even in the hundreds of billions of dollars, onto families, onto hospitals, onto taxpayers, onto you. You pay for the mess they won't clean up. And of course, given the control of this building, fossil fuel companies benefit from enormous tax breaks and loopholes. This lost tax money means lost school funding, lost infrastructure funding, lost health care dollars. Real people lose real benefits. Just for one example, the corporate welfare polluters get just from direct fossil fuel subsidies could provide 3 million families with SNAP benefits, food for their kids and families. The billion-dollar deal at Mar-a-Lago takes tax money straight from regular American taxpayers and hands it to billionaire oil barons. Last, let's consider lost opportunity. Because of fossil fuel corruption here at home, the industries of the future are now developing more overseas, abroad. The jobs of the future are being created abroad. The technologies of the future are being developed abroad. Here in the U.S., fossil fuel is diligently out to destroy these opportunities and the jobs and the future that comes with them, to protect its dying business model that cheats in the market while making our air smoggier and our water dirtier, polluting for free. China races ahead in renewable energy, electric vehicles, and clean technology as America is dragged further and further behind by fossil fuel political interference. That dirty deal day at Mar-a-Lago was a turning point. Donald Trump put our government up for sale, and the looters and polluters wrote the checks. And now, every agency, every policy, every decision reflects their ownership. EPA is their protector. DOJ is their law firm. Department of Energy is their henchman. Interior is their leasing agent. The State Department is their industry diplomat. Their oil Capone. The repeal of clean energy programs Trump got in his Beautiful for Billionaires bill is expected to cost the U.S. economy $1.1 trillion by 2035. In a decade, $1.1 trillion lost to the U.S. economy. That's a loss to all of us. Meanwhile, fossil fuel CEOs rake in as much as $40 million a year. Their companies make $30 billion a year. And the industry sponges up government subsidies of over $700 billion a year. That $700 billion is the bill the American people foot every year in more disasters, higher insurance premiums, higher electricity and fuel costs, worse family health, lost good jobs, and a dwindling economic future. With less clean energy, there will be more emissions. And with more emissions, there will be more disasters, pushing us towards the great climate insurance collapse. Everywhere are warnings from insurers, from economists, from bankers, from regulators, from the big short guy who predicted the Great Recession, from The Economist magazine, even from climate-shy Fed Chair Jay Powell. Warnings abound. Warnings are everywhere of climate economic disaster ahead. Is it too late to wake up? I hope not. Though for sure, our pathway to climate safety, it's narrowing. If we're going to solve the climate danger, we're going to have to take on the democracy danger. We do not have to accept the United States of America turning into a petrostate. We can still act. We can pass the Disclose Act to expose the dark money that enables fossil fuel corruption. We can call out and spotlight the climate denial fraud operation that has for so long deceived the American people. We can and must end the fossil fuel industry's corrupt, pollute-for-free business model, a model that violates the laws of economics as well as morality and decency. Why should polluter costs fall on taxpayers? It's simple. They shouldn't. Democracy also should not be for sale. Not to fossil fuel billionaires, not to Exxon, not to Chevron, not to Koch Industries, not to the American Petroleum Institute, not to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, nor the National Association of Manufacturers, for damn sure not to Donors Trust or to Leonard Leo. For a whole lot of reasons, with our climate safety right up at the top of the list, we have got to end the corruption. We've got to spotlight the dark money front groups and the armada of special interest organizations spreading fraud. Democracy needs to belong to the people, not to the highest bidder. When people understand what was done to them by fraud and corruption and dark money, there will be a mighty reckoning, and it cannot come too soon. So I conclude once again, as I have in 301 of these speeches, now for the 302nd time, time to wake up. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 3 p.m. on Monday.